For those of you who are watching at home, welcome to the Laguna Woods Democratic Club. Please join me in welcoming Senator Dave.
It's been so great revisiting with old friends and seeing some new folks. For the newcomers, let's give it up for the best Democratic club in Orange County. Realize how many Democrats there were in Laguna Woods or Orange County until you joined this club, right? But pretty amazing. Anyways, I was asked to give a brief update on what we've been up to, and for those of you who don't know me, my name's Dave Min. I am privileged to serve you in the state senate, representing over 1.1 million people in the cities of Laguna Woods, Laguna Beach, Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, Costa Mesa, Irvine, Lake Forest, Anaheim Hills, Villa Park, Tustin, Orange, and I'm probably missing some areas, but it's been a tremendous honor, and I try to take this seriously because I know I don't have a lot of time to be in the legislature, and we're trying to do as much as we can. So how did I get involved in politics? So some of you remember me from my very first run in 2017, when I ran for Congress and lost in a very close primary to someone you probably never heard of named Katie Porter. And the honest answer, as I think a lot of you know, is that when Donald Trump was elected, that activated a lot of us. And I suspect a lot of you are here today because of what Trump represents. And to me, it's very antithetical to the American ideals that I grew up with. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about my own background. My parents were Korean immigrants. They grew up during the Korean War and its aftermath. And that was at a time when the economy was really devastated, food was scarce, but they grew up with this idea ingrained in them that America was the country that could make a difference in people's lives, not just here in this country, but abroad. And so when we talk about American exceptionalism, it is very near and dear to my heart, because I wouldn't be here but for the sacrifices of tens of thousands of American GIs who lost their lives in a foreign land to protect people they didn't know, a land they didn't know. My parents would have grown up in something like a communist North Korea. That's where I would be today. So every day when we think about this, that's important to me. When we talk about Ukraine, when we talk about the importance of American values, those are important to me. They're also important to me because I wouldn't be in this position before you today, but for what America offers, this idea of socioeconomic mobility that we call the American dream. Look, my parents came over here, like probably many people in your family, with nothing in their pockets and just really some hopes and dreams. They got married here. They had me and my brother here. My brother's a Stanford-educated doctor, the one they like a little bit more than me, I think. But in every way, we owe everything we have to this country, and that is, I think, what America represents. It's this idea of inclusion and mobility, and that is what's at stake. We see it all the time with what the MAGA people are trying to argue for and represent. And look, I represent parts of Orange County where we still see that residual. We see in Orange attempts to try to demonize and marginalize people. In Huntington Beach, we're seeing book bans. And we know that those values that Donald Trump has trumpeted are out there right now. Now, why did Trump really get to the whole core? Because I'll tell you, I never thought about politics. As many of you know, I worked for Chuck Schumer back in the day. I worked for the Center for American Progress. But I was a policy guy. I never thought I'd run for elected office. It was terrible selling magazines as a kid. And my first paid position was selling Cutco knives. Do any of you know what that is? So I sold 2 sets of Cutco knives. One was to my parents, and the other was to their best friends. And so, I really didn't think I'd ever be in politics because a big part of this job is calling people you don't know and asking them for money. It's amazing and fun. Sorry, that was sarcasm. But I think Trump, when he was elected, just really got to me at my core. The first things I remember him doing, going after women, the trans ban, the Muslim ban, going after undocumented immigrants, and I don't fit in any of those categories, but I will tell you something about myself. When I was a kid growing up, I grew up in a community in Northern California where there were not a lot of Asian kids. There were no Korean kids in my class, so I was in 5th or 6th grade. People didn't know what Korea was. I was the second smallest kid in my class. But I think because of those life experiences, I've kind of had this instinct to want to stand up to bullies and to fight back. to stand up for marginalized communities. And that at its core is what is happening in America right now. You've got a bunch of bullies trying to pick on marginalized communities and go after them. Why are people going after trans people right now? Because they feel like they're the most vulnerable. It really has nothing to do with that issue. It's about who we can pick on, and that is what Donald Trump and his acolytes stand for at the end of the day, is bullying, and we do have to stand up and fight. Now, as your state senator, I've been proud to try to carry that fight out in the state Senate, proud to be a leading voice against anti-Asian hate, against anti-LGBTQ hate, against the rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hate that we're seeing. And unfortunately, we see hate is on the march right now. And I believe we have a duty, particularly people like me in elected office, to stand up and vocally call that out, while also building the infrastructure and foundation for that hate to go away. So I've been proud to support efforts to try to teach ethnic studies in our schools, to build curricula where we can teach other histories, to try to support community organizations, deal with marginalized and underserved communities, because I think that's important as well. If we want racism and we want anti-whatever hate to go away, we have to build the bridges so that that will happen in the long run. We have to eradicate hate through education and love. But in the meantime, we have to call it out, because there are too many people right now, frankly, who feel comfortable acting on instincts that were really unthinkable a few years back. And we see that with the anti-Asian hate epidemic, but a whole bunch more, and I think we have that obligation. As the state Senate, I've been privileged to offer something like 50 bills today. Not all of them get through, as happens, but we've passed 17, and we've got another 14 that are live right now for this legislative session. And I think I've spoken in the past about some of our past bills, so I won't go over all of them. I will say that we've had a few key focal points that you may note if you're following us, but if you're not, that's okay, because nobody really follows what the legislature is doing closely, except for a handful of you. Where's Jonathan Adler? Jonathan, of course, is following everything we do. That is his job, yeah, and his hobby and his passion. But we've had a focus on gun violence prevention. So as many of you know, we were able to end gun shows in the Orange County Fairgrounds in my first year. And gun shows on all state-owned property in California in my second year. We've also been able to pass less publicized, but I think equally important legislation, including requirements that gun dealers have basic training and surveillance to make sure they're not selling guns to people who shouldn't have them, to people who may be trying to pass them on to others who shouldn't have them. We have requirements for bars and people who sell alcohol that they have to go through training to make sure they don't overserve people, to make sure that they don't serve people under the age of 21. We have no similar requirements in place for people who sell guns and ammunition, and we ought to, so that's what we're trying to do. I've got one bill that I was really hoping we could get across the finish line this year. It got paused this year through a complicated process, but we're hoping to reintroduce it next year and get it across the finish line, and probably could use your help, frankly, if this is something that's of interest. But it's a bill that would require any financial institution that wanted to do business with the state of California to divest from the gun industry. Because while there may be a constitutional right to bear arms, unfortunately right now what we're seeing is too much pressure to sell guns. When you've got the gun industry marketing guns that look like toys to kids, designer guns, this is kind of getting away from the key point that guns at their essence are dangerous. They're designed to kill people. And we have an industry right now where the only way you can maximize your return on investment, as Wall Street thinks of it, is to sell more guns. We have over 400 million guns in the country, more guns than people. It's not a surprise that we're the only civilized country that has the rates of gun violence we do. And I think we need to force Wall Street to defund the gun industry. Another major plank of mine in the legislature has been around my wife's work. For those of you who don't know, my wife is a leading expert in this country, and I'm not humble bragging here, she really is, on the issue of domestic violence. She runs a domestic violence clinic at UC Irvine, where I used to teach. She runs something called the Initiative to End Family Violence, which is an interdisciplinary center Some of you may have been to some of their programming. They bring together community activists, different types of academics, whether they're doctors, nurses, lawyers, sociologists, or whoever else, to try to address this vexing and all too ubiquitous problem of domestic violence that really affects all of us. You know someone for sure, probably many people that have gone through domestic violence. It hits all income brackets, all ethnicities, all types of socioeconomic groups. We've passed 5 bills related to domestic violence. A lot of them are real game changers. We've got another 3 in the queue right now that we're hoping to pass this year. So if all those go through, we'll have passed 8 of my wife's bills, which is kind of awesome. So she really is a partner here, and it's amazing. Bills here that I'm particularly proud of. One of our bills that we were able to pass made California the first state in the country to recognize reproductive coercion, pressuring your partner to have a child, interfering with their reproductive outcomes as a form of domestic violence. It is very, very common in domestically violent relationships, because what better way to control your partner that wants to get out of the relationship than by forcing her to have your child. And so this is very common, and it was not recognized as a form of domestic violence or coercive control, but now it is in California, and we know that other states are starting to pass legislation modeled on this. We're also the first state in the country to offer an outlet for survivors of domestic violence who have been forced to take on debt by their abuser that they didn't want to take on. So that form of coerced debt, we now have a pathway for victims to be able to cancel that debt if they can show that that was coerced debt by an abuser, and to avoid the credit implications of that. And that was a hard bill, because not only did the usual suspects come out against it, the men's rights groups and all that, but also the banking industry came out against it very hard. And so it took us a couple of years to get that across the finish line. Another big focus of ours has been around climate change. And this is a multifaceted issue. And I just want to give a real shout out here to the President and Congress. What they are doing right now is exactly what this country needs to be doing to lead the world. The massive investments that the IRA, BIF, and other packages passed by Congress, signed by the President, have done is they spurred a ton of private investment into green innovation, into infrastructure, into the things we need to try to quickly transition our economy to be decarbonized, to have zero emissions, so that we can avoid the dire outcomes that scientists are predicting, while also keeping our economy strong. Look, the fastest way to decarbonize is to just tell you guys you can't use energy, you can't drive, you have to turn off the lights, turn off the air conditioning, but we're obviously not going to do that. So if we want to actually turn this country, our climate situation around, if we want to avoid the crazy weather patterns that are accelerating right now and our worst fate, we have to rapidly transition our economy. And what's happening right now at the federal level, which I had nothing to do with, but I just want to give a moment to the President, because this is really important. I'm hearing from everybody that we're seeing trillions of dollars in potential investment coming into manufacturing, into hardening our grid, our electric grid, all the things that you guys don't think about when you turn on the lights, and making that all zero emissions. And that's going to accelerate our transition away from fossil fuels. So that's really important. In a similar vein, I have tried to push in my time in the Senate for thinking about how we can aggressively, thoughtfully address the climate crisis. So energy investment has been a priority of mine. I was able to push the governor to get 2 key items, which seem small, maybe not because they're millions of dollars, but in the context of the many billion-dollar budget, these are small line items. But we got $150 million for green innovation research at the UCs, which I think is so important, because if we want to turn our economy around, we're going to need a lot of innovation. And the UCs are the powerhouse research institution in the world. I think that's an important investment, as well as trying to provide tax credits to green companies that want to headquarter here in California. So another $100 million for that. Again, these are small numbers, but hopefully they're the beginning of more and more investment that we'll see here in California. I was also proud to author this year a couple bills that are kind of technical, but relate to medium and heavy-duty transportation and how we decarbonize those sectors. Our trucks, our buses, farm tractors. How do we get those off of fossil fuels and transition them over to electric or hydrogen or something else? All technical problems, but these are important if we want to make sure that our kids and grandkids and great-grandkids have a future that's brighter than ours, because right now it's going to be more dismal than ours unless we turn things around. Also is proud to author a bill that I believe will be signed into law this year by the governor that would preserve 30% of our open spaces as preserved spaces by the year 2030. This is called the 30 by 30 initiative. We'll codify this if it gets passed by the governor, signed by the governor, passed out of the assembly. It's already passed out of the Senate. But think about our coastal spaces, our open spaces, our beautiful spaces here in California. That's not only good for our souls, because ultimately California is about our outdoor spaces. It's also proven to be important for protecting our biodiversity. One of the biggest threats we face as a civilization, we don't even understand the impacts of this, is the mass extinction crisis we're facing. In California, you may not realize this, is one of the hot spots of biodiversity. We have a lot of unique species to this region. And if we continue just going willy-nilly and developing it without preserving open spaces, we're going to be accelerating that extinction crisis. And we don't know all the impacts of that. We know it'll be bad for humans because that biodiversity is part of what we came up with, what we evolved with. And if we get rid of that, it could have dire consequences on us. So these are the types of bills I've been focused on in climate. Again, a lot of them are hard to explain, but they're important bills, they're well-researched bills, they're bills that are supported by the environmental community. Okay, I don't want to talk too much. I guess the last thing I'd say. Okay.
I just want to interrupt for a minute. It's my fault. I apologize. I didn't explain the process for asking questions before we started. There are cards, index cards on your tables, in the middle of the tables, and pens. Okay, so please, if you have a question to ask, write it on one of those cards, and either Nancy Hensel and Maureen Mailer will be around to collect them, and then I believe Jean Lepowski will be asking the questions of Senator Mitt. And I'm sorry.
Oh, no, thank you. You gave me a moment to collect my thoughts. So, all right, so last few things I want to mention. I sit on the Budget Committee for Education, and so in that position, I deal with the budgets for our K through 12, our community colleges here in California, our CSU system, and our University of California system. And I'll just say that that's been an eye-opening experience for me. I've tried to make the most informed decisions I can. I've worked closely with our trustees, including, I want to just give a shout out here to Barbara Schulman. But we've been in close contact with our trustees, our superintendents, even principals, to try to understand what our school districts here need. And I just say at the K through 12 level, the one thing that's been emphasized to me over and over is that we have too many bells and whistles in California. We have like 1,300 school districts in this state, maybe 13,000. It's a big number. And I might add a zero or subtract a zero, but that what we ultimately need is flexibility for our schools and some accountability, but what we really need at the end of the day is get back to the basic approach. How do we get better teachers, more teachers? How do we reduce class sizes? Because at the end of the day, that's what's important. And we spend a lot of money on different types of programs that are often not suited for all districts across the state. So that's something I've been pushing for. I've been pushing for access and more slots at our UCs, particularly for in-state residents, while trying to push for college affordability. And so for every year I've been in the Senate, I've tried to push for Cal Grant, essentially for a big push to try to make college debt-free for any student that goes to UC here in the state that's in-state. Because that should be the basic starting point of a college affordability. Should also mention last couple of things. Been very much a strong advocate on women's reproductive rights and healthcare. Unfortunately, that is under attack in a good part of this country right now, particularly following the Supreme Court's horrific and poorly considered decision in Dobbs. And unfortunately, we're celebrating today, not celebrating, we are marking the 1-year anniversary of that. That is a decision that was created when 3 members of the current bench on the Supreme Court literally lied before Senate Judiciary Committee about their views on precedent and Roe v. Wade. And I'm not running for the Senate, but if I were, I'd probably push that line as well. Or it's the U.S. Senate, I should say. But, you know, I'm proud to try to push for protections here in this state for women's reproductive health care and rights, including abortion. I was proud to be a co-author of Proposition 1, which overwhelmingly passed into law last year, which enshrined abortion rights into our Constitution here in this state. And we'll continue to push for common sense reproductive health care across the state, as so many women across the country are unfortunately facing the criminalization of even basic health care. And we're hearing horrific stories right now of pregnancies that clearly have been problematic, that endanger the health of the mother, and yet their doctors in those states can't do anything about it. We're facing a real crisis going forward. Last thing I'd say is been an advocate for small businesses. Small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy here in Orange County and really across the state. I was proud to bring back $2.1 billion in my first year in the Senate for small business grants for businesses that were affected by COVID-19. That benefited a lot of businesses here in Orange County. I want to say something like over 1,000 businesses received grants ranging between $500 and $2,500. I've also tried to push for regulatory relief for small businesses in each of my 3 years in the Senate. And unfortunately, that is just hard to get through in this legislature. Not everyone agrees with my viewpoints, but we'll keep trying. I was able to get a bill through that I think will get signed into law later this year that tries to address the issue of junk fees, that different types of hidden fees that banks and more often non-bank lenders will give to small businesses that are very deceptive and a lot like the predatory subprime mortgages we saw in 2007. Last thing I'll just say, and I know it's the last thing I've said a few times, but the budget we brought back, because we brought over $200 million back to this district, and I'm very, very proud of that, because that's money we didn't get before I was elected. We brought back $70 million for different fire infrastructure. In my first year, we brought back, I want to say $30 million for a program that's called the Cal Alert Wildfire 2 program. It's basically infrared cameras. So right now we have cameras across the state. That was stage one. That will let you know, like if there's ever a potential fire report, the fire department can pull up a computer and they can go look at the particular area that's potentially been affected, and they can see what's happening there. There's these little cameras all across the state in fire-prone areas. What we were able to fund was stage 2 of that, which is infrared cameras, so we can see at night or when there's a lot of smoke. And they're also going to do a topographical, satellite fuel mapping, so they can see exactly where the density of fire fuel might be. And with AI and big data, and this is smarter than I am, I don't even understand how this works, but they can pull up a laptop and they can, in the near future, they'll be able to deploy resources to where the fire's going to go based on that mapping and what they can see from the infrared. And that's going to really save lives. It's going to allow us to respond to fires more quickly. In year 2, I was able to get money back for a fire station out in the canyon area. So we have a new hand crew out there. They're going to have a brand new fire station very soon, and we were able to fund that. One other thing we were able to do this year, I think this will get out very soon. It might have already been signed by the governor, but we were able to get a technical fix for that would allow a new fire station here in Laguna Woods. For the Orange County Fire Station. We'll be able to have faster response times, and it was something around like the way that you granted the parkland before, and we had to undo the state law to get this passed, but we were able to get it done, and there is going to be a new fire station here in Laguna Woods very, very soon. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the accomplishments of my staff. I have an amazing staff, and here in the district, a lot of you know people like Ash Alvandy, Matt Kern, James Slack, who work tirelessly on just trying to show people that government can help. That government is not always a problem, that we can make people's lives better. And they've practiced that. So they've helped, and I just want to read the stats here. They've closed 2,000 EDD cases, 3,600 cases from constituents overall. So there are over 2,000 families in this district that were able to get their unemployment benefits during COVID, when this was a big problem. That means that they were able to pay their rent, put food on the table, because of the work of our staff. We've hosted 20 plus town halls and events. I've done 100 plus live keynotes and videos. We were able to bring back $10 million to constituents from different state agencies for complaints or issues that they had. We've done 50 plus roundtables with stakeholders and 30 workshops, including things like the senior scam stopper that we did with the state, appointments, small business resource events, and things of those sorts. So they've been busy, we've been busy, and I'm sorry I don't get to see more of you. This is my first full meeting I think I've been at since COVID. But we've been hard at work, and I look forward to seeing more of you during our recess. So I'll be on recess from July 15th or so to August 15th, and then from September 15th through the rest of the year. So I look forward to seeing you, a lot more of you in those coming weeks, but know that I'm not just lazing around. We're working hard trying to represent you. With that, I'd love to take any questions you might have. Thank you so much for your time.
So
One question is, are you getting input from teachers with regard to what the education system needs in California? Okay. And the comment, which I agree with, is business people don't necessarily know anything about education.
So I think the second part of that question, which was more of a comment, I tend to agree with that because I think we often talk about how competition is good in a lot of markets, and it is. And for those of you who don't know me, I used to be an economic policy advisor for Senator Schumer and for the Center for American Progress. And so we generally do want competition in markets, but when we talk about public goods, something that the market won't provide on its own, which is what education is, there's a lot of reasons and a lot of theoretical arguments as to why you don't necessarily want competition, or at least you want to mute the competition, because ultimately, if someone's just out to make a buck on something that the market wouldn't provide, you may be short-shrifting kids at the end of the day. So I think that is important to recognize. As far as teacher consultation, I'm proud to have been supported in past campaigns by the California Federation of Teachers and the California Teachers Association. And yes, I do consult with those folks fairly regularly, and then through them with other teachers. But if any of you, teachers or otherwise, would like to weigh in with comments on pending legislation or ideas, we're always happy to consider different perspectives, different ideas. I get to propose a certain number of bills each year. A lot of them come from people like you, so please weigh in with us as much as you'd like.
Okay, another question. Is our electrical grid being upgraded to handle the increase in electric vehicles?
That's a great question. The answer is not yet. It's something that we're thinking about. And I just read a great book, California Burning, and it's about PG&E. I don't know how many of you have read that book, but it's a great read. It's a quick read, and it's kind of the history of the electrical grid here in California, how PG&E formed, takes us through the two major wildfires that both almost bankrupted PG&E. And I think the understanding right now is that, look, we're one major wildfire away from the state owning PG&E. And that's not necessarily a good thing. And so we do have a lot of work to do. We know we have thousands of miles of wire that has not really been inspected or upgraded in a long, long time, sometimes over 100 years. So we have a lot to do. Those PG&E fires happened because there were different types of poles that were sparking that really hadn't been inspected in like 50, 60 years because of a lot of decisions. And this is another area where maybe competition is not the best model either, because this is a regulated utility. It's what we think of as a natural monopoly. But we have a lot of work to do. We're hoping to upgrade it. It's going to take a lot of money and a lot of time. And one of the big debates that I've seen in my 3 years in the Senate right now is who's going to pay for it. Should it be ratepayers? Should it be shareholders? Of course the shareholders should pay, but there's not enough money just from the shareholders. How do we fund this? Should it be the state and taxpayers? How do we fund this? And how do we aggressively start upgrading our existing electrical infrastructure? And then how do we harden and expand it for what we know is going to be a huge demand increase as we try to push a bunch of electric vehicles onto the grid? So these are real challenges we're facing. Know that the state is looking at a lot of these questions very closely. You see these, every once in a while you'll probably see a headline that talks about how a new roadmap was issued by such and such agency, typically the Air Resources Board or the Energy Commission. But those roadmaps reflect a lot of work, a lot of thought into how we can address some of these exact same questions. Another thing I think we have to look at is other forms of storage. A lot of folks think that hydrogen might be another type of energy storage that we can use rather than just electricity that doesn't rely as much on the grid. There's other forms of storage like pump storage, etc. There's probably some climate people in the room that can speak about this better than I. But there's a lot of things happening out there that we're all looking into right now. But this is going to be a complicated, multifaceted thing. Understand that the grid, the way we think of, like we can turn on the lights right now and they turn on, that took like 100 years to develop. And it's going to take us some time to try to revert back. But we have to meet those 2045 goals. We have to start meeting the benchmarks to reach those. And that is an imperative in the California State Legislature, at least from here.
Okay, another type of infrastructure issue. What is California doing or planning with regard to water shortages? Will there be a regulation of groundwater, for example?
Great question, and I forgot to mention earlier, I was just named chair of the Natural Resources and Water Committee earlier this year. So those are all the committee hearings that I've been spending a lot of my life on right now on these same issues. And we just had a lot of flooding, right? We had historic rainwater, and that a lot of that was not stored. And so the complaint is always, well, why don't we have more infrastructure to capture that? And the answer is complicated. Part of it is that a lot of the dam sites are already built. So the ideal places to put dams, unless we do mass diversions, are already in place. So we do need to update our dams. But a lot of what we need to do is what's called groundwater recharge, which is taking that excess water and pumping it into our underground aquifers, diverting it so that we can then tap into that later. But also the question is, should we prepare for the next 100-year flood? Or should our infrastructure be looking at more like the 10-year flood? Right? Do we build out infrastructure, prepare for this year's flooding, which we probably think of as not that common, or do we build it for something less than that? These are the types of questions that people are dealing with right now. We've got 4 water bonds in the state legislature, 2 on the Senate side that passed out, 2 on the Assembly side that passed out. One of them deals entirely with the question of just water flooding, because this author's district was really impacted by flooding. It's all about how we prevent flooding, very detailed. The other one is a more omnibus type package that looks at all water issues and a lot of other issues as well. The Assembly has 2 parallel bills. The final question, I'm sorry if I'm getting wonky because these are very wonky issues, but what do we do with biodiversity? If you represent or live in an area that has like a lot of fish and game, and that's maybe something that you prize, you live around the Delta or some river, what do we do if we divert all that water and drain that river dry? What does that mean for biodiversity, for wildlife, for your quality of life, for someone who loves the outdoors? These are real questions. So anytime we have these types of hearings, we get hours of stakeholders weighing in, because there's a lot of different complicated perspectives here. So these are challenging issues, and I'm not trying to punt this issue. We have to do something about it. We have to capture more water. We have to protect biodiversity. We have to find the right balance, but these are the issues we're dealing with. Last thing I just pitched, here in Orange County, we just created a really cool new thing, which, how many of you guys have heard the term toilets to taps? Okay, sounds kind of gross, but it's the idea of taking sewage water and filtering it and treating it so that it can go back into the regular system. Now, people are often turned off by that, but here in Orange County, we came up with something ingenious, which is an intermediary, where we're taking sewage water, we're treating it, and then we're using that to recharge our groundwater. And then it comes into, so it's kind of filtered in a couple different ways, and it ends up coming out of the ground just like a normal aquifer. And so this is something where we're going to be able to provide, hopefully, with this model, something like 99% of our own recycled water. We'll need very little outside water. And this is the type of project that I think the state should be exploring a lot more of.
Okay, a set of questions about housing and homelessness. What can the state do to alleviate homeless people's need for health care and shelter that is affordable? A related question, what is your stand on rampant development, even with the housing, even with the water storage, and also on homelessness? And then, again, what are we doing about homelessness?
Yeah. Great question. I know homelessness is one of the top concerns across this state, not just in Orange County. And I'll just try to address this in a few different ways. By the time you see someone on the street, that person has typically been homeless for a while, months, maybe years. So we all think of the homeless population. I know my kids do. I used to before I really started to learn about this issue. That is the homeless population. But the hidden homeless population, the ones you don't see, is actually much, much larger. And so by the time you see someone on the street that's got mental health problems, drug abuse problems, they've typically been homeless for a while, and it starts with that hidden homeless. You can't afford to pay your rent, you're couch surfing, maybe you've got a family, you're staying at your sister's until that gets a little burdensome, then you maybe live in an RV, a hotel, something like that. But at some point you end up more and more down on your luck. And that typically then gets accompanied by mental health issues because it's very mentally taxing to be housing insecure, not worrying about where you're going to sleep one night. And that may come with drug addiction issues. And drug addiction issues also can lead to homelessness, obviously, and mental health. And mental health can lead to drug addiction and homelessness. So this is kind of an unholy cycle that we're seeing, a vicious cycle. And so when we talk about the people on the streets, I think there's a growing consensus we need to deal with that. That a lot of those folks are not in a position to make a rational decision on whether or not they want housing. And so I think that the governor's package, which you've probably heard of, called Care Courts, which is meant to expedite the process of putting people on the streets who are clearly mentally ill and not able to make a decision for themselves into some kind of conservatorship where they're then put into some kind of housing with wraparound services. Is something I think that we're all starting to see push forward. So you'll probably see that rolled out in the next couple of years. And I think that's important because as a moral issue for the homeless, I think it's important that they get the care they need, but also as a moral issue for families. Like, I think families have the right to take their kids to the park, to take them for a walk down the street without being confronted by people who clearly have issues. And so those are the types of things we're trying to balance right now, is how do we balance the individual rights of people who are on the streets with the rights of others. So that's one thing we have to address. And for that to work, by the way, we need to make sure that there's housing and services for those people who are mentally ill and who have substance abuse issues and are chronically homeless. So we have to make sure we have the funding for that. In Orange County, I think we're doing a great job with some of the Be Well centers and things like that. But if we want to truly address homelessness, we have to address some of the root causes. And the biggest reason people are homeless in this state is the cost of housing. In all of the high-income communities, places like Silicon Valley, San Francisco, LA County, Orange County, the high cost of housing is what's driving homelessness. It's also the #1 reason people are leaving the state. So we have to do something about housing. Now we've got some structural roadblocks that are not going away. Prop 13, whatever one thinks of it, is not going away. And Prop 13 means that, for a lot of you that's great because you can afford to, live in the homes that you're in right now. But it also means that you're not selling those homes. There's not the same supply there is in other states. Another big issue, but that's not going away, whatever you think of it. Number 2, we've got high costs of building. And again, that's due to permitting issues. It's due to, construction, trades, and other things, wages. But again, that's not going away in California either. I mean, you could argue about it. You might have different views on it, but that's not going away. And then we have environmental review. So the environmental review process is something that a lot of folks have stated is a real impediment to development in the state, but that is not going away. So what we're trying to do in California right now is work around the edges. And I've been a 100% vote for what's called the YIMBY movement, yes in my backyard. And that's not always popular. I know some of you may disagree with that. That I promoted things like the ADU developments that some of you may be taking advantage of, lot splitting. But the reason I vote for those is because at the end of the day, I want my kids to be able to afford to live in Orange County. Right now, it is becoming too expensive, and we need more housing. We need housing of all kinds, but particularly those low-end ones. And so we have to provide more funding, but the funding has its limits. We have to provide more housing at the end of the day. And so that's kind of a short answer, because I'm running out of time, to a very complicated question.
A related question has to do with students. Why should students in the California university system be homeless or food insecure when CEOs and chancellors and administrators are making lots and lots of money?
A great question again. So you'd be surprised by what percentage of the UC, CSU, and community college student bodies are housing insecure or food insecure. It's shocking. I mean, at UC Irvine, I forget the numbers, but I want to say like 20% are food insecure. They don't know where the next meal is coming from. Like 10% are housing insecure. This is a UC. It's much worse at CSUs and much, much worse at our community colleges. And so we are pushing right now. So again, I mentioned I sit on the budget subcommittee for education. We're pushing for more funding for housing for students, and as part of their student aid packages to have that housing available to them. On food insecurity, we're trying a number of different approaches to try to take that away, because obviously you're not going to be successful in the classroom if you're hungry, if you're worried about where you're going to sleep that night. So we have to address those issues. And we've got a long ways to go, but we're recognizing the problem. We're trying to deal with it. And frankly, some of this goes to the larger issues that California is facing that we have to address.
Okay, changing to a different topic. Gun violence, domestic abuse, and prejudice and hate all start with lack of education. And what are you doing, what are you going to change in the school curriculum to address these issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we can just start by talking about first steps. We're not going to, there's no magic bullet here that's really going to solve all the problems, but I think it starts with emphasizing diverse perspectives. And I know there's been a lot of criticism of what's called the ESG movement, environmental, social, governance, and also DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not DIE, sorry. I'll be back. But I think these are important values to emphasize. And again, going back to where I view this country, I think diversity and equity and inclusiveness should not be controversial topics. As a moral matter, but also as an economic matter, because we know that these are associated with better outcomes in the boardroom, right? Corporate boards that are more diverse have higher rates of return on their stock, on performance. That diversity of perspective really does create a better atmosphere. It's also part of life. If you're sheltered right now as a student from different viewpoints, what are you supposed to do when you get out there in the real world? That's something we really need to emphasize. So I do support ethnic studies in our high school classroom, and I just want to de-demonize that because there's been a lot of misconstruing about what that means. It's just about teaching different perspectives. It's about teaching different prominent African American accomplishments and contributions to this country. About whether it's LGBTQ people or Asian American people. It's teaching about other people so that students see diverse accomplishments and perspectives reflected in their history book. And we're talking about one-year curriculum, so it's probably not enough, but that's what we're talking about right now. And I think that's a start. It's not the end-all, be-all. I think at the end of the day, some of this can happen in the classroom. Some of it needs to happen outside of the classroom. We need to build better bridges, and I think we need to stop cloistering into our different groups. And I know I say that even as I criticize the MAGA people, but I'd be happy. I have engaged with the MAGA people, sometimes to the chagrin of my staff. But I think that it's important we create dialogue. We try to find commonality because that's ultimately what America should be about. And to get to the America that we want, an America where we get rid of hate, where hate is not in people's hearts. I think we have to build those bridges. And again, we all know those stories. You all are, you've lived life. And you know that when you're exposed to other viewpoints and other people, you're less likely to say, oh, that person isn't that, or is different from me. That person is a bad person because they belong to that group. That tribalism goes away when you have more interactions with different groups.
Okay, how about this one? What can we do to fix the influence of big special interests, big money?
In politics?
In politics.
Or anywhere. That's a great question. I mean, I think, look, at the end of the day, the courts need to change. Like, we cannot, I could talk people in the face about all the things we could do to limit the influence of money in races, to limit the influence of special interests. But we also know right now we've got a Supreme Court and a lot of lower judges who are out of control, who don't respect precedent. They are making stuff up right now. And I think if Erwin Chemerinsky is here, he'd probably tell you something similar, although in much more erudite language, and reciting a lot of Supreme Court cases off the top of his head. But I do think we have a problem right now with the courts, and it affects us in a lot of ways, not just in corporate campaign finance, but also in a lot of areas like gun violence, reproductive rights. In California right now, as your state legislator, we are trying to think about how we can limit gun violence, but we're hamstrung. It's like both hands are tied behind our back and our feet are hogtied because the courts keep setting precedents that really limit our ability to do anything. The same is true of reproductive rights, and it's certainly true of campaign finance. And they're meddling more and more into our states as well, which makes it very difficult for us to do what we need to do. So yes, we need to limit the influence of special interests. But for us to start doing that, we need to get these people who, by the way, are clearly bought and sold by special interests, Clarence Thomas et al., Alito et al. We need to hold them accountable. And I'm not running for the U.S. Senate, as I said, but if I were, I would be pushing a platform of trying to think about ways to limit the influence of the courts and or to try to reshape them.
Okay, does the California legislature do earmarks, and should it?
We have district requests, and so that may be what folks are referring to as earmarks. And so I've gotten all the money I mentioned that I was able to bring back to our district. It was from the form of district requests. And I think these have a role to play. I know that they can be criticized. I know there was this idea back earlier in our lives when pork barrel spending and earmarks were demonized. I don't know enough about the federal landscape. I would say this, I think there's an argument and a growing body of evidence to suggest that when you had these types of district requests, that there was more cooperation across the aisle. That one of the reasons that members of Congress stopped breaking bread with each other, stopped talking to each other, and became very polarized, is because in the old days, if you wanted to bring money back to your district for an important project, like the fire station, you would have to work with other people, and not just people in your own party. And when you got rid of that in Congress, you ended up creating more and more polarization, more and more extremism. And in California legislature, I'll say I work well with my Republican colleagues. I'm also proud of the fact that we were able to, because I was elected, bring back money for important priorities. Because before I was elected, this part of Orange County got 6 cents back for every dollar that you paid in taxes, which was one of the worst figures in the state. And now I can't say that we're like at $1 per dollar, but we're moving upwards. And I think that's important because at the end of the day, representation is also about getting you your bang for the buck on the tax dollars you spend. So I've not voted for any tax increases, just to be clear, since I was elected, but I've also been able to bring more back to your existing tax dollars.
Okay, another question is about diversity. What can we do to increase diversity in communities like ours here in Laguna Woods?
Great question, and probably part of it starts in the educational curriculum, so we can't go back in time. But I know many of you actually engage a lot. I've heard stories of, there's line dancing classes that are very popular. I don't know if you're able to get into those, but just, trying to make it, and I have to do this as an elected official, as a politician. I strike up conversations with people I don't know all the time, and I'm outside of my comfort zone, but I just encourage you to all think about doing that. Maybe just talk to someone that you see every day that you don't normally talk to. And I know this sounds like, like an elementary school cartoon, like PSA, but I think that's how it starts, which is just, breaking out of your comfort zone. Because if you're in your comfort zone, you're going to hang out with people and talk to people that you're comfortable with. And if you want to actually broaden your networks, broaden who you know, it's just about being a little uncomfortable, maybe talking to someone, interacting with someone that you don't normally interact with, joining a club you don't normally think you'd want to do, like line dancing. And yeah, if you want to join the Republicans, go talk to them, maybe we can convert something. Yeah, over here, this is dead body, okay. Anyway.
All right, can the state do more to stop the few crazy city councils and school districts from banning books that parents and kids want to be available for their own kids?
We're exploring that right now. I will tell you, there's a bill passed in Illinois this year that I may try to take up next year that ban book bans.
Oh, yeah.
So I have to look we have to look at the language, but that's something we may consider, but like along those lines. But it's a problem. Some of you may have seen that I was not in town earlier this week, but one of my representatives, Kelly Jones, read a statement I prepared to the Huntington Beach City Council, and then they called me out by name. But this is not right, and the history of book bans in this country is very ugly, and it corresponds with some of the worst parts of our country's history. And what is obscene and pornographic to one person, because they've used that to ban books that are part of the canon. The Catcher in the Rye. They argued that Robin Hood at one point in time, around the McCarthy era, Robin Hood was pornographic because it taught class conflict and rising up against the wealthy and those who had means. So what is obscene and pornographic is clearly politicized, and it's been politicized throughout our country's history and the history of book bans. And right now, clearly the focus of a lot of this politicization is around the LGBT community, and that we can't be politicizing our books. If you have a problem with your kid going to a public library and accessing materials you find offensive, I get that. Go with your kid to the library. Yeah. Talk to them about it. But don't ban books for everybody else who may want to have access to those
books. Okay. Are any of the gun bills giveaway raffles of guns? There's an example from Northern California where AR-15s were prizes from the fire department?
Are those legal is the question? I don't know the answer to that. I can ask the Attorney General, and I wasn't aware of that happening.
Yeah, the question is, are there regulations about, yeah, so I guess, yeah, is it legal?
Well, I guess the core question is, are AR-15s legal? And is the person receiving that legally allowed to purchase an AR-15? So those are the core questions. But yeah, I'd love to see assault weapons banned in this state.
Okay, there's a mention of a movement to change the state constitution with regard to impeachment. Do you have any comments on that?
I don't know the measure in question, so I can't comment on it.
Okay. All right. There are, I don't know if I know you're not here as a candidate, but still, there are multiple candidates running for the congressional district for which you will be running, and one of the concerns among Democrats is making sure that we end up with at least one Democratic candidate in the general election. At what point during the runoff do you think it would be appropriate for a candidate to withdraw in order to advance the greater good?
That is a question I cannot answer in my official role, but I will use that as an opportunity to address something that I probably should address earlier. About 9 weeks ago, I made the worst decision of my life, and I got behind the wheel of the car after having had a couple drinks. I was out late. I'm not normally out late in Sacramento, and I was arrested with a misdemeanor DUI, and it made the news. And I assume many of you have seen it, maybe all of you, maybe there are some of you who have not. And first, I just want to say I'm incredibly sorry for that huge lapse in judgment. It's caused a soul searching with me and my family. I've stopped drinking. I'm still fun. I've stopped drinking. I'm seeing someone, and just to be clear, I wouldn't qualify as an alcoholic, but I'm seeing someone just to make sure that I'm on the straight and narrow. I don't need alcohol in my life. It's not making anything better. But that is a mistake that I made, and what I ask of folks in my community that I represent is to judge me not on the worst decision I've made, but on all the decisions you see me make, and let the record just I apologize, and for a lot of reasons, including ones I really can't mention in this forum, because I also know the importance of the role that I am in right now, the importance of the role that I'm auditioning for, and I just want to really say that how sorry I am, and that nothing like this will happen again, but I'm hoping at the end of the day I'll be a better person, a better father, a better husband, a better policymaker. And I will say the one thing that this has taught me is, it's taught me a lot of things, but to have more empathy for others, and to try to be more thoughtful about situations, because it's easy as a policymaker when you're voting on bills to just think of these things in the abstract. And I've never had anything like this happen in my life before. So for me, being arrested, having the worst moment of my life dragged through the press, it was an embarrassing moment, but it's a humbling moment, and I'm just hoping to carry that and just be a more humble, better person. And I'll just say I talked with my priest. I've been to church. Our church community is amazing. I go to St. Andrew's on Barranca in Irvine, and I'm just trying to be a better servant.
Okay, David, you are an inspiration. What advice do you give to young people about government service?
Well, I would say that, first of all, I think you guys are an inspiration, because you're here, and you're honestly the most active and engaged club in Orange County, most active and engaged group of Democrats here in Orange County. When I talk to all of you, universally, you're well versed in what's happening in this country, in politics. If everyone had your activism, passion, engagement, and thoughtfulness, our community in Orange County, our world, our country would be such a better place. So I want to give you guys one. No, seriously, this is what we need more of, and that's what I advise young people, is to look to you guys as an example, because the first way that you get involved is to do exactly what you're doing, which is you're here at a Democratic event on a Saturday. There's lots of other things you could be doing with your time. I hear the golf here is pretty good, or the line dancing classes, or whatever else you're missing. But I think that this is really the first important step, is being engaged, following what's going on. You know, you talk to kids, my kids out there. I had to tell my kids this morning, like, hey, you know, Russia is kind of tearing itself apart, and they had no freaking idea. And they're on YouTube all the time, but they're watching, I don't know, Taylor Swift or whatever else. And so staying active and engaged, I think, is really important. And then taking that next step of figuring out, okay, what do you want to do? And like I said, it's a comfort zone. Politics ultimately, for someone who is in it for the right reasons, is about stepping outside of your comfort zone. Because look, look, we all know examples of politicians out there who are in this for the wrong reasons, and you know they're grifting, they're making money off of this. But for those of us who want to do this because we want to make our communities better, it's hard. It's hard work. It's talking to people. You know, I'm not with my family this Saturday, but it's about finding a greater good. And the one thing I counsel is that I think to be a successful elected official candidate for any office, you have to be authentic. And not everyone might agree with everything you stand for, but that authenticity is important. And for you to have that authenticity, you need to have passion. Passion for what you believe in. Why are you running for a particular seat? What drives you? What made you step outside of your comfort zone? And so that is what I tell younger people.
Dave, we can't thank you enough for being here today and for your service in the state senate. And Janice Burstyn mentioned when she was at the California Democratic Convention about how inspiring the young people were there. And if you look at young people like Manny Chavez, who's on the City Council in Costa Mesa, and we contributed to their pizza party when they were the UCI Dems. And when you think about that you know that's where it all starts. So we continue to support the UCI Dems and the Orange County Young Dems because they are our future. And with any luck, they'll grow up to be like Dave. Please don't leave yet. We have our raffle. Dave, I don't know if you can stay to pull the raffle tickets, but I know you have another engagement afterwards, but that's up. It needs Matt's approval over there. Okay? Oh, and we have something Ray has something to present to you.
Thank you for the presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we have our Nifty 60 fundraising drive that we're doing up until election of next year. And part of that, we're baking our donations. So for our guest speakers, we'd like to make them an honorary blue cap baker. So here is your blue cap. Wear it proudly wherever you go.